Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your brother Cooking with Solstice, and today I'm going to be making a video on what I've learned after making beats and music for over 5 years and what I've learned after making over 1,000 beats. So without further ado, guys, let's get into the video. Alright guys, so the first thing I've learned after making beats for over 5 years and making over 1,000 of them, the first thing I learned was picking quality samples. And I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with me on this, saying, oh, you should sample anything that you find. It helps you become more creative. It helps you to think outside the box and make new things that other people haven't heard before. And I agree with this to a point, but I think it becomes a lot more difficult to create a really good beat if you don't have something that's hot in the first place. So what I usually like to do is pick something that I would genuinely enjoy listening to first, and I wouldn't even think about sampling it. I just listen to the song and I really like it. I'm like, wow, this is just good music in general. And then I'd think about, okay, I would sample this section, I would sample this part. Maybe I would take out these drum sounds, these chords, these bass lines, these vocals, stuff like that. All right, guys, so the next thing I learned is chopping on the drums or the rhythm sections of a sample. And what I mean by that is chopping on the kicks, the hi-hats, the snares, chopping on bass lines, chopping on chords, certain sounds. You could hear like a weird effects, but it's in time with the original sample, the original beat. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because sometimes when you chop just a random spot and you're like, oh, this sounds really good, it's gonna make your beat sound choppy. So you want to make sure that you sample wisely and you choose a spot that helps retain the original rhythm, because a lot of times I hear some people chop and it just sounds choppy because they don't chop in the time increments of the original sample. And while this isn't a strict guide to follow, it's definitely a good guideline that I noticed helped me along my journey. So the next piece of advice I have for you guys is actually sampling from drum breaks. And the reason is because I find original drums sound the best. You could always make drum sounds on like a synthesizer or a plugin or buy it from a pack or something like that. But I just find that a lot of the sounds that I want personally are going to be found on breaks or sections of a record where only the drums are playing, or something very subtle in the background that I can just EQ out or even add to the beat to help complement it, give it some more depth to it. And I've bought hundreds of packs and I've noticed a lot of the packs just really aren't that great. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't, and the drum sounds are huge, especially when you're making beats, man. Your drum sounds have to be up to par, and if they're weak and they're just not hitting correctly, then your beats aren't gonna sound as good. And obviously you can do things to make your drum sound better, and you can EQ, you can compress, you can add saturation, some grit, using all sorts of different plugins and methods, but it's hard to polish a turd, if you know what I'm saying. So get good quality drum sounds, sample from breaks, sample from drummers. I sample a lot from AJ Hall. I buy his drum packs and they're really good because he's an actual drummer who's very good, and it's hard to replicate that feel. It's all about the feeling. So consider sampling from drum breaks. Another piece of advice I have for you guys is to add grit, noise, saturation, and dirt to your samples. I find a lot of times the beats that I play or beats that I make without these things just kind of sound empty, kind of sound lifeless. They don't sound as good. Our human ears are conditioned to hearing a certain amount of saturation, distortion in music due to the older processes of making music, where there was guys in the studio recording with analog equipment like cassette tapes and reels to reel, where the things they use would naturally add a bunch of noise and distortion, or just a lot of subtle things that can't be replicated with digital plugins and means. So that's why our ears have become accustomed over the years to hearing saturation, a little bit of distortion, a little bit of grit, a little bit of dirt, and without it your beats sound kind of lifeless. So don't forget to add some, on the MPC Live they got the lo-fi plugin, they got saturators, they got the old MPC emulators, the SP12000 emulators. So don't forget to add those to your beats. Add a little bit of color, and just be very careful with this because you can also add too much. The thing that I've noticed a lot as well is when you're using effects, use it subtly. Don't use too much because then it just sounds terrible and doesn't sound as good. And you want to make sure it sounds good, but you don't want to go overboard. So it's up to you to experiment and find what sounds best to you. Another thing I've learned over time as well, just from making so many beats and just learning song structure from trial and error, would be adding pauses to your beats, as well as taking things out and putting things back in, like reintroducing them. And what this does is it keeps your beat interesting. It keeps it from becoming boring. If you hear the same thing for too long, it just becomes boring. So what you got to do is you got to take things out and then put things back in, reintroduce them, because the ear kind of needs some time to reset. And when you hit them with a little bit of silence, people don't know what to expect. They don't know what's coming next. Is there a new chord change? Is there a new sound coming in? Are you adding a melody? And sometimes all you got to do is just bring back the same pattern, put it back in. You could also add in a melody. You could do so many things. So experiment with that. Play around with your song structure. Don't keep it so rigid and keep it as one single thing. It's not interesting. You gotta make your music alive and dynamic. Another thing too as well that's super important that you guys want to make sure you do is making sure your mixes are good and making sure your mixes are tight. And what I like to do usually when I'm making a beat on the MPC Live over here is I mix while I'm making my beat, so I have less to mix when I bounce it out into Ableton. And this just helps speed up your workflow. It just increases the quality of your beat, because for the longest time I struggled with my mixes on my beats. I had good patterns, I had good sounds, but the mix, I didn't know how to mix, so I ended up destroying the beat. A mix will completely change your beat. You could have a really good beat and just mess up the mixes, make the snare sound weird, make the kicks sound out of whack. You could make the melody clash with the main sample because you're not taking out frequencies that need to be taken out. Because when you have a mix, you only have so much space frequency wise for things to live inside of, and if they all clash together, it's like a muddy little ball of dirt that doesn't sound good. So make sure you really study and work on your mixes. Listen to other artists, how their mixes sound. Watch YouTube videos. YouTube is a huge resource for that kind of stuff. Buy books, read, take notes, study. And that's just another thing, man. Listen to people that you look up to. For me, it's Jay Dilla, Pete Rock, Madlib, Force of Nature. Study the people you look up to. Listen to their beats, and over time, from a lot of active listening, you'll pick up certain techniques that you hear that you could introduce into your beats. And just be a constant student to the game and the field that you're trying to improve and become really good at. It's what it takes, man. You got to do a lot of practice. You got to do a lot of studying. You got to continuously learn and grow and evolve in the thing that you're trying to get good at, and eventually you will become good. And just have patience and you'll eventually get there, guys. I hope this video encourages you guys. I hope this video helped you out a lot. And if it did, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. And without further ado, it's your brother Cooking with Solstice. Keep making beats. Never give up. I believe in you. Peace out.